All right. Welcome back. We are MDEV1001. That's Mobile Data Management in the summer 2023 semester at Georgian, and it's week 12, part one of our broadcast and recording. And this week, let's talk about a couple of things. We have a couple of administrative items to talk about and some other things. I see some other people have joined you there in the class. I feel terrible, but I'm not there. I can see them in the background. So a couple things. One is this week is about remote data sources, Firebase. So we're continuing with remote data sources in the second half of the semester, but Firebase is our plan. Now, I'm not sure if you guys have used Firebase in the past. Some of you may have. Yes? Anybody? Hopefully you guys have, so you use it. It can be tricky depending on which product you're using, and we'll talk about different products that you can use. We're going to be using Firestore, which is the product that makes most sense for web, in my opinion, right now, as well as iOS and Android. And there's a couple things we have to talk about. If I was setting up Firebase and I was doing it for multiple apps, right? If I had the same back end and I was going to use it for multiple apps, I may decide to go through an API. And the reason for this is because you can have an API do all the heavy lifting, lots more control, as opposed to going to the back end directly. But for this scenario, I want to talk about Firebase directly. You'll see that it's not so bad because we've been doing things directly already. We've been directly connecting with with an API. And we're going to try with Firebase as well. But again, it's not that we couldn't modify the backend so that it uses Firebase instead of Mongo. Same kind of operations, but and even the same API, so that your front end wouldn't change at all, right? Could have been a way of doing that. But then I fear that you wouldn't have learned how to do the Firebase stuff. That's why I've chosen to do it in-app as opposed to with an API. The API would hide everything, and that's not what we want. Not for today. All right, so last week we talked about how to kind of put together JWT. I know some people had some challenges with this. It wasn't just one set of people, especially on Android, making it work. Did you guys have a chance to make it work on Android? I don't know if you did it. Yeah, how did it go, Eric? Did it go okay?
Yeah, I had a little bit of strangeness with getting the token to read correctly, but after I did some finagling, I was able to get it to go. Okay,
that's good. It takes a little bit of work sometimes. Like I can tell you that, I know that when we say, oh, it's easy, like I said before, maybe it's not as easy. Like it takes a little bit of work, but again, it's good practice for you guys as it allows you to kind of get used to how to make an app that's similar from an iOS perspective. So I'm glad. You got it done. Hopefully, other people did it too. I saw most people did it when I looked at the, kind of online here. Here's Janak. There we go. And what we want to do this week is we're still doing remote data sources, but we're going to talk about Firebase as if you've never done it before. Now, I'm not sure if has it been introduced to you somewhere else, Eric, or did you just pick it up and learn it on your own? Okay.
Well, I had it in one of my Java classes.
Okay.
We developed it in another program, but I don't think it's been brought up in any of our other courses.
Okay, that's good. So at least it should be. Even though we're doing data management here, Firebase is something that you should at least touch upon. If not this semester, I'm sure you'll kind of wind out this semester with very little, kind of stuff. Let me just. But you'll see that what's going to happen is maybe next semester when you hit advanced iOS and Android, you might see some of that come up more often. All right, so without further ado, let's talk about what is Firebase. All right, so what is it? And it's really a platform as a service. So it's run by Google Cloud Platform, and it's like you're using Google Cloud Platform, and there's a front end that they've created for you that allow you to use their services in a very, very easy way. I find that this is almost like the the easy face of Google Cloud Platform. You could use Google Platform and Cloud Platform in different ways. Let's call it GCP, which is what it's normally called, right? So GCP, we can totally use that in a totally different way. We can build virtual machines. We can do all the same stuff that we would normally do with Azure or with other services, web services that are out there. No problem. But what it does, what it says here is true. It simplifies everything when it comes to development. It has a ton of stuff. We're only focusing on one little part of it. So let's start off with what we want to care about this week, and this semester, which is there's two databases that they have. So again, we can use a NoSQL database. This is the second type of NoSQL database, which is the real-time database. Okay, real-time database is something that was older. Firestore didn't really exist back when I learned about Firebase way back when it first came out, and real-time database didn't have the same structure. It didn't feel or look like Firestore does today. Like for example, your JSON data. Your JSON data wouldn't map one-to-one necessarily with something like a real-time database. But for a while, that was all they had, right? And then what they realized, they wanted something a little easier for us to use with mobile apps and with web APIs and those kind of things. And so they created something called Cloud Firestore, which is similar to real-time database, but allows you more control, like much more control. Thing about Cloud Firestore, let's just call it Firestore, is you can do all kinds of things with it. You can do the same kind of operations you would normally do, as an example, with authentication and so on, if you really wanted to. But we don't do that with Firebase, and I'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, so Firestore is the way we're going to go, and I'll show you everything about it in a bit. But first, I just wanted to go through this a little bit. Authentication, we're going to touch upon this next week. Okay, so this week, when we start off, we're not doing authentication. In fact, we're leaving the same authentication controllers in place from last week. And as we build our app, you'll realize why we're doing it, because, well, it's more challenging than you think. Okay, just to let you know. So that's one thing that we're going to look at. And the reason for this is because there's a lot of little moving pieces here to get this thing going. And there are some requirements that we're going to look at as well. So authentication, the way it would work is you could build a login and registration screen that connects to, we would use the same screens on our end. So our front end would look the same. But the back end to log in and register is a whole other beast that we're going to handle next week. Okay, so for today, for this week, we're pushing it off. We're deferring that whole business. It's just too much work in one day, all right, to do. Now you guys know what to do, so we're not changing our front end. It's going to look the same, but we're leaving certain things the way they were. Other things that Firebase has. So again, Firebase is the platform, real-time database, Firestore, authentication. Those are packages or products, if you will, that are contained. That are kind of working within Firebase the platform, which is hosted by GCP for the most part. So it does things like cloud functions. If you want to do a serverless, Node.js hosting, you can do it through a cloud function, actually, with Firebase. So it doesn't quite do what render.com does. Okay, so render.com, it does have hosting. If you want to host your website on Firebase, and it's a something like a React website, or if you want to, do an Angular website, Firebase will do it for you. Just use Firebase hosting and you're good to go, right? Which is kind of cool, right? I like that. But it won't run Node.js. If you're going to run your own web service, or if you're going to run your own Node and Express, like full stack stuff, you're not going to do it necessarily like this. Okay, you could use Firebase with cloud functions, but I don't recommend it. Cloud storage is another thing that they do, so you can store other things up there, and that means things like images and other kinds of blobs that you could store up there, video media, a lot of other stuff that you can use for cloud storage. Analytics, so it's tied into Google Analytics, and Firebase Analytics is kind of almost like an advanced form, performance monitoring, crash monitoring, all kinds of stuff that gives you a bunch of tools that are out there. And one great thing about where it says and more, here's some and more. It's also compatible with Unity. So if you're making games, like I do as an example, on the back end, you can put together a database, for your user data, right? It'll also do things like that. So if you have, kind of a multiplayer environment, you can use Firebase to store some authentication, logging out, all that kind of stuff. It'll handle it for you, and it'll keep track of all the database stuff on the back end really, really nicely. So that is kind of a high-level overview of Firebase. Let's take a look at the documentation a little bit. I think it's better just to physically look online and see what this looks like. So let's start off with Firebase. So here it is. This is where we would start. So for today, if you haven't registered, the idea is you need to register for Firebase. You need to create an account. And if you already have a Gmail account, it's really, you're kind of more than halfway there, okay? So that's the first step in order for you to use the stuff that we're doing today. You must register with a developer account for Firebase. It doesn't take too long, okay? I don't know how long you found it, Eric, but it doesn't really take long at all, okay? It's almost nothing, actually, if you think about it. And once you have it, then, there's a couple things. You'll see that there is a go to console link here, okay? That's what it'll do. But first, let's talk about Firestore, which is what we're going to use. So Firestore is something that, again, has extensions for iOS, Node, like it says, Java, a bunch of these things it'll do, C++ directly, as well as Unity and Go. And they keep on adding more and more services, things like Python and all that stuff. It'll talk about Firestore and what it does for you. So if you want to watch a video, then you can always go to Docs. If you go to Docs, and then once you click on Docs, you can choose Build, Docs Build. And then once you go to Docs Build, on the left, you can see that there is Cloud Firestore. And then if you go to Introduction, it'll talk about what it is, okay? What we want to do is get started with Cloud Firestore. And this is kind of where we're going to get to, right? So the first thing we need to do is kind of create a database that we're going to be using, okay? And it talks about how to put things together. You can see that, so Web API, an iOS app, Kotlin and Android, Java and Android, Java, and there's more. You can choose other things in here as well, and they'll give you little code snippets to get going, right? For us, what we're going to be doing is we're going to do a iOS app, and it tells us kind of how to put together things from the get-go, all right? But before we even start this, let's go back to that Firebase screen and go to console, right? So I've already done this, and I'm going to recreate this. I may have some side effects, right, from what I did earlier, okay? But we'll talk about the challenges. And the first part is working on the back end together. So please follow along as we work on this back end, okay? So take a second. Let me know if you're ready. And if you're ready, Eric. What about the rest of you? How about the people here, Hitesh or anyone else? You guys have Firebase, kind of, have you signed up for Firebase? Any kind of sign up or agreements or anything like that? Are you there? Can I continue?
I'm all right.
Are you already good? Heel, how about you?
Yeah, I use it for notification.
I thought you would. Okay, and about Jason? Jason, did you sign up for Firebase? He's there. Yeah, he's not answering. And then how about my friend Kosuzachuku, which I haven't seen in a while? Are you signed up for Firebase? Are you good to go?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, so if everyone's ready to go, and I guess Ruchit and Janak and some other people that are online, Dhruv, hopefully you guys are all good, and I'm going to move on to the next step. So the next step is clicking on this Go to Console button up here. Okay, so clicking on Go to Console, you're going to see this test project that I made today. You're going to have your projects, or maybe you won't have any projects, because if this is the first time you're doing it. So let's click on this Add Project button. This is the next part. This is now, we're into the in-class exercise. And before I even click there, I want to talk about the goals for today. So really, again, we want to create an iOS app that connects to Firebase Firestore. Number one, we're going to use our existing login and register screens. We're not going to touch those. And we're going to update our CRUD screen and add edit screen. And I've given you a bunch of gists on Blackboard. If you actually look on Blackboard, it's a mess. There's like a ton of stuff, right? But we need to, because we're going to recreate everything again. It's okay, Jason, I see you. Don't worry. And again, what I said here, I want you to duplicate this process for Android. And I say you can use ChatGPT, but you're going to find because ChatGPT is 2021, okay, and Firestore has updated, some of the stuff you might get, the code that some of this code you're going to get from ChatGPT may be incorrect. May be incorrect. You may actually have to look at the documentation. I'm sorry, right? But you need to do it. So that it might be something that's happening. I'm letting you know in advance, okay, that, you know, it's maybe a more challenging project to make this week. All right, back to what we were doing. So I'm going to click on Add Project. Let's do it together. So when you add project, you're going to enter a project name. Now, what it says to me is you're 2 projects away from the project limit because I got a project limit, right? I'm going to erase some of those projects from before. Don't worry. I'm not going to worry about it, all right? But for you, you shouldn't have that message because you're probably going to be far away from the project limit, okay? And so here we go. So I'm going to kind of put together this project. I'm going to call it MDEV1001 in the summer 2023 semester, and it's ICE 11. That's what my project name is going to be. Notice it makes it into a lowercase name for the project. That's okay. And I'm going to click on Continue. Now it's going to ask you in this screen, do you want Google Analytics? Not for us. I think for us, we can turn it up. You can always turn this stuff back on, like A/B testing, and which is very good. And, you know, all this other stuff that it comes with. I'm going to just click on No. So it actually just stops all that noise from happening from our project. Again, you can always go back and turn it on later. Create. Okay. What this does is it provisions a virtual space, a workspace for you to work. This is the next step. So it's going to take a second. Okay. It's not going to be like instant. And you need to wait until this happens. And again, one of the things that I'm really, really happy about when I use Google Cloud Platform, especially Firebase, is the ease of setup. Like compared to Microsoft Azure, compared to AWS as an example, or something like that, I find that using Firebase is like super simple, like way simpler than those. Okay, my project is ready. I'm going to click Continue, and I'm going to continue to go. It's going to take me to this panel, this Firebase panel here. And notice I'm on a Spark plan. The Spark plan, if I click onto it for a second, it's going to say that it's like my no-cost plan, okay? A couple things to note. If we wanted to do things, you know, as an example, the ability to extend your project with Google Cloud and so on, and a bunch of other stuff that we can do, you know, this will stop us. If we have a lot of usage from this project, this little example project, it'll basically say you're out of capacity. It will eventually if you use it a lot. Now it takes a lot to use it, but for starters, you know, having a free plan is awesome using the Spark plan. So that I'm really happy about that as well. So 2 plans. I'm using the Spark plan by default. That's what you get too, and you'll see that up here on this part right here. This is your Spark plan. Okay. Next, look at the options you have to start off with, right? So this is pretty cool. You can add any app to get started, right? First, on the left, you can see there's Build, Release and Monitor, Analytics, and Engage. Right now, our analytics are turned off. We can always turn them back on if you want to, like I said. Okay. You can also look at all products if you really want to, like authentication, like other stuff. And we may need to do this next week because machine learning, because there's a lot of stuff that's out there that's really great. Let's get back to Build. So that's what I want to do, Build. And on the left, I want to click on Firestore Database. Notice that there's a lot of stuff we can build here. I'm going to click on Firestore Database. And when we go to Firestore Database, it says, okay, well, let's create a database. How do I get started? Okay. Now, this is where it gets a little hairy. Okay. And I mean that because, yay, we're creating a database. But how do you put data up there? And this, my friends, is where we can, you know, there's a bunch of ways. You could slog it and put it in manually. That's going to take a while. But I'm going to give you an alternative, and hopefully this is going to help you with your assignment as well. All right, so let's talk about it. So first, let's create our database. Create database. And then it's going to ask me, okay, cool. When you create your database, it says in here, it talks about some stuff. How do you want to start the database? Do you want to start it in production mode, or do I want to start it in test mode? And I'm going to start it, of course, in test mode because that's the kind of guy that I am. Test, okay? And look what it says here. This default security rules for test mode allow anyone with your database reference to view, edit, and delete all data. What's the difference between production mode and test mode? Well, what it does is it allows anyone from any IP address, right, and all that kind of stuff. So eventually, you know, again, this lasts for 30 days. So for us, for the remainder of semester, test mode, guys. We don't have to, we're not doing a real live database. If we were, we'd have to go into, excuse me, knives, my friend, knives. If we were, we'd have to do, kind of go into production mode, and there's some things we'd have to configure in order for us to use our database from a certain location. Okay, so start in test mode. I'm going to click next. Next, it's going to say, after you select this location, you cannot change it at all, ever, right? And it says the Cloud Firestore location is NAM5, United States, okay? You could certainly leave it there, but there's other options. And if you scroll down, you can see that there is North America, Montreal, which is probably closer to us than some of these places, right? So I recommend North America, Montreal. It's going to be a little faster than some of these other options. Like, for example, you can see Europe and US East. US East, I would say South Carolina or North Virginia. Both those places are going to be probably fine as well. Actually, any place in the US is going to be okay for us. But I think just from a performance perspective, I'm just going to use North America, Northeast 1. Okay. There's also, if you pay for it, there's a North America, Northeast 3, I think it is, which is strong. That would be the closest. But we don't have access to that right now. I'm not going to modify it. Let's move on. Okay. So I'm going to click Enable. And once this thing enables, so again, we're coming out of Montreal. So whenever we respond, it's going to be pretty good response time. It's provisioning the Cloud Firestore. This is the first part. And as soon as it does, when it finishes doing its thing, let's click onto that, right? It's going to take a second, okay? It's going to take a second. It should already be done, actually. So again, Firestore. And if it doesn't, if it's not correct, give it a second, refresh your screen, and you're going to come back to this, okay? So this is an example of our empty kind of project. This is what this is. And what I want to do now is let's consider some options. If I add a collection, if I start a collection, let's call it the movie collection, please. Okay, because this is what it's going to be, the movie collection, right? And I'm going to click next. So movie collection next, right? And should it be called movie or movies? What did we call it last time? Do you remember? How do we check? Well, again, I'm just here on just going to go to my desktop, and I'm going to go to,
I think you call the movies.
Movies, right? But let's go to Georgian for a second, and let's also look at the our in-class exercises for thing. But you're probably right, and you can see that our the stuff that we want to talk about is movies. Movies is what we called it, and those are our movies right here, right? So therefore, it should be called movies, not movie. Movie is one movie, movies collection. Okay? I'm going to click on next. And now it asks us for this cockamamie stuff. So do I want to add an auto ID or do I want to add a custom ID? I'm going to add an auto ID. So auto ID, right? There's my auto ID for my document. And then I can start putting in these fields. Guys, do you know how many fields a movie has? How about for your movies, like the ones that have extra stuff? Notice if I go back to Visual Studio Code here, and again, I'm just on a PC. I'm going to go to the Mac in a second. But you can see that I got all these things. So how would I do it? If I was going to add Star Wars, let's do one together, okay? So you see the difficulty. So I'm going to go Movie ID. I'm going to go back to here and put that field in. Movie ID, we want to see as a number because that's what it is, right? And then we're just going to copy the movie ID for Star Wars. Okay, I'm just going to zoom back in here. And there's one, and then I'm going to add a field, right? And then the next field is title. So that's, if we look at it, that's a string, right? And we're going to grab 20th Century Fox here, and we're going to put that in. And you can see that this is such a slog, right? It's like really slow to do this, right? So let's go back to genre, put that in. Now genre, and we have to do one. And let me explain why I want to do one with you. I want you to see the structure on the back end. What was that? Sorry?
Well, you added the studio as the title header.
Did I?
And then you missed studio.
Doesn't matter the order, but
yeah.
But thank you. So genre is next. Genre is an array that let me put just to keep it in mind. I'll put studio for a second. So here's studio. Thank you for that. And then we'll get 20th Century Fox. Doesn't matter. The order doesn't matter, as you're going to see in a second. Okay. And then I'm going to add in genre, right? So there's genre. I'm keeping the same names, like the same properties from our JSON file. And now, it's not a string, but rather it's an array. Once I do an array, you can see that there's a sub area here. And now, what are they? It's an array of strings, potentially, right? So that's kind of interesting. So here's action. And here is adventure. And here is fantasy. Okay, so there's that part right there. Let's add in another field, right, which is directors. You can see where this is going. Let's see if you can complete it faster than me. I'm going to make this an array. And I'm going to get Irvin Kershner as the director. I'm going to add in another field, and it's going to be writers. Writers is also an array. And we're going to get the first guy, which is Lee. Put him in there. And we're going to get the next one, Lawrence Kasdan, one of my favorite screenwriters. Also wrote Raiders of the Lost Ark. Very nice. And George Lucas. You know who he is. Or you should. And that's writers. And it shouldn't be. It should be, oh yeah, it is. And then let's add another field down here. And you can see the next one is actors. And these actors should be recognizable. It's also an array. Here's an array. And you can see that the first actor is Mark Hamill. Again, totally underutilizing his field. You know, he's been very typecast as Luke Skywalker, but he's done a lot of voice work. And he's done other movies as well. Not as popular by far as Harrison Ford. And poor Carrie Fisher, she didn't have a good life. Oh well, what can we say about that? All right, so that is our actors for Star Wars so far. I'm going to add another field. And now we're going to get into year. Year is an integer. So we're going to make it a number, right? Because that's what it is, a number. Again, this is going to relate to any JSON data. I'm getting another field. And length is the field. Again, that is a number. I'm not going to put the values in yet for these. I can just kind of copy paste both of them really quickly, 1980 and 124. If I'm not wrong, there we go. And then another field, we're going to go into short description. So even though it's a short description, it's still a string. There is no other option to kind of make it so that it is larger, right? So it will host all of this, no problem, right? So I'm just going to grab all of this, right? And let's put that in there. There it is. And then we'll add another field. And that field is going to be MPA rating. And MPA rating is a string type, so that's PG. And finally, we're going to do critics rating here. And critics rating is a number. And we know it as a double, because that's what it is on iOS. But for us, it's a number. A number is a number to a number. Guys, do you really want to do this every single time you put in a thing for this kind of, imagine if you had this kind of complexity. So we'll talk about methods. So here it is. I got my first one. I want you to add one. Please add this first one. So save. And what you're going to see is that when we add stuff manually here up on Firebase, Firestore, you're going to see that it's going to put things in alphabetical order. Your properties are now listed in alphabetical order. Again, it doesn't really matter, right? Because you're going to have access to those properties. It's an object that it's created online. It's a NoSQL database. Okay, questions so far from our wonderful audience? Okay. What about if I added another document? So if I click Add Document, you can see that there's no other options for me to add anything in any other way. I need to use this structure, right? There's a little ellipses here, and it can say Delete Collection. That'd be bad, right? And on the right, you can see that there's Delete Document or Delete Document Fields. That's also something we can do. We can delete a lot of stuff. But there's no quick way to really build a document. If you're here on the right where it says More in Google Cloud, well, now we can see that there is import and export. Please don't click on this. Okay, let me explain what happens. If you try and put import and export, it means import and export documents. And the only way you can do an import and export of documents is if you pay. Yeah, you have to pay. There's no other way, right? Well, there is a way, right? And Query Builder, what's Query Builder? So you can see here, here are query results. If I want to get the collection for movies, it kind of allows you to look at all the movies in a different format. It actually builds a little table for you that has the schema for that particular collection. That's what it does. Okay, so that's what Query Builder does. I'm going to go back to panel view. And so, yeah, so it's kind of the same thing. I'm just going to close this off. But there is no quick way to do it. So let's talk about some strategies. Here's a strategy. You make a little app like a data seeder equivalent that we did in we did iOS when we started putting things together for core data. Remember that way back? Make a little data seeder app that is literally a Node.js app that's on your console, like literally like local. And then that little data seeder app is going to read in all the JSON and then send it with one command out to like an add, do an add command, and it'll seed your app full of the data, especially if you have, a ton of information. And that's okay, but you'd have to write some code for you to do that. And that's going to take a whole other time. I don't think it's really necessary. So there is an app that you can download called FireFood. FireFood, right? It's one of a number of different apps that are out there. This is not the only one that's out there, but it's definitely available for you to download as a free trial. Now, it gives you 14 days. Now, this is critical for you if you're going to do it for your database, all right? And why I'm saying this is it's critical because for assignment 4, let me mention this again, you need to have your real-time database on Firebase, which means all the work that you did to convert stuff for assignment 3 was different. 3, we were using OMDB. But 1 and 2, especially 2, we did authentication and everything full CRUD with our database, right? And kind of like the same thing, 4 does full CRUD and authentication with Firebase. Now we're sitting at August 3rd, and your final project is due, your final assignment is due August 18th, which is the Friday. It's not the Sunday, it's the Friday. Now, realistically, you should have this done by next weekend. Okay, this thing that I'm talking about, because after I show you the authentication piece next week on Wednesday, you should have everything you need to get your stuff done for Sunday, all right? But I've given you more days like we normally do because I know you got lots of stuff going on, and I want to give you some flexibility, okay? Now, here's the thing, though. All right, here's the thing. The reason why I'm saying to you that you should use this with care is there's only 14 days unless you want to pay for this app, or you want to do a slog and do it manually. It's up to you, okay? Or you can build a little app, like with, if you're so skilled, with a little Node.js app or some other app, or you can find another example online. For example, if you use ChatGPT, you can say, I want to have a data seeder, function. Here's the JSON file like you would have normally. And I want this data seeder function to seed my Firebase. That's okay for the first time. You can turn it off and on if you really want to. Similar thing that we did with our core data. Lots of ways to do this. I'm just presenting a way of doing it quicker. Okay, here it is. So let's get into, I'm going to switch now to my Mac Studio. All right, so here's my Mac Studio. Here's FireFood. And I've downloaded the app for free. Here it is. Now this is my other project, my test project. I'm gonna show you what it looks like to add a project, okay? This is what it will look like. This is what it should look like for you eventually. For now, it doesn't look like this because you need to click Add Project. When you click Add Project, it says, well, sign in with Google. All right, so if I sign in with Google, it says, cool. I'm going to sign in with me as an example, and I'm going to say Allow. And then when I go back and I close this off, right, you're going to see that back over here. It says, you know, I got another project, which is M2023 ICE 11, right? And I got my this project here. I kind of added both of them, right? And if I click Add a Project again, right, and again I go to sign in with Google, it kind of says it only adds one project at a time, right? All right, so I'm just letting you know that this is the way it works. If I click Allow again, you're going to see that if I close this off, and if I go back to Firefoo, if I had another project to add, we could add it here, okay? These are only compatible with Firestore. This is why it only picked up two projects from it, okay? Things to note, right? It doesn't look like I can remove a project very easily, okay? So one thing is on Firefoo, if I wanted to kind of edit and remove my project from here, like if I go to edit, I can add a Firebase project, and so on. But it doesn't seem that I can remove my Firebase project in any way. One thing to note is if I look at my project that we just made, so I'm just going to go here and click on movies, you're going to see that I have that one movie we just added. Do you see this? Does anyone not see it? Because I'm using Firefoo because I want to help you. That's why I'm doing it. Because I don't want you guys to suffer, okay? Suffering is a bad thing. All right, sometimes this doesn't work, by the way. This won't work sometimes. Sometimes you need to actually create an iOS application and get information back and store it here. All right, there's some things you may have to do to make this work, and it'll give you instructions on how to do that, okay, if you have a problem. I had to do that for Windows. I actually had to create an iOS project, an iOS component for the project, and that's how I got this. Okay, so now that we have this project to see that it's working, here's this. You can see that I got one director in an array of directors here, and this is my query. I'm going to delete it. So I'm going to click here, and I want to delete this thing altogether. So if you click on here, I can delete this one document. So if I delete the document, it's going to ask you to delete the any sub-collections or whatever, and it's going to say, are you sure you want to delete? I want to say, don't ask me for the next 15 minutes, and click OK. Okay? It's going to delete that document. And if I go back online to take a look at our Firestore, you can see it's gone. Okay? I did this for a couple reasons. One, I have an empty movie collection now. Okay, so this is kind of the thing I did. And this is why I did it. You can't make an empty movie collection, believe it or not. You can't make an empty collection, ask you for a document. You won't be able to move forward if you just want to make an empty movie collection and then add it later. This is one thing, one reason I wanted to do it. Next, I'm going to go back to our little, project here. And what I want to do now is I want to upload or add in, the data. So let's see what this looks like. So you can see that here it says export results here, import documents. Okay, that's pretty simple. You can also right click. If you right click here, you can also go import right there. You can see that that's there. You need to have that movies.json file somewhere. I'm sure you have it in multiple projects now. Where I have it, just to get you to understand, for me, is if I go to desktop and if I look at my last ICEs, so MDEV1001 as an example, and then here's ICEs, here it is, even on ICE 10, right, then I should, sorry, maybe I might have it, not on ICE 10, but actually ICE, let's go back to ICE 9, or way back here, maybe further back I have it, right, let's say, I think 7 or whatever, way back. We have it back here somewhere. So here's 7, and then you can see that we might have a, no, I don't think 7 has it. I think it's further back. 6 has it. There's this movies.json file right here. It's really small, all right? You can also download it from GitHub, okay, if you really want it. But you must have this thing to upload, okay? So this is the one I'm going to use, this movies.json file from ICE 6, okay, or from any other source that you want to get from the internet, all right? Lots of sources that we've used the same file over and over again, okay? So I want to do that. So I'm going to click on Import Documents. It's going to ask me where do I want to import from, And I'm going to choose the data path. So let's choose the data path. And again, I'm going to go to my desktop. I'm going to go to ICEs, where I have my ICEs. I'm going to choose ICE 6, where I know that's there. Inside of ICE 6, I'm going to click on movies.json, and it gives me a preview of what I've imported. See this right here? That's how I did it. And then I'm going to click select. And it's going to say, hey, do you want to import all these movies? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm just going to click import. And when I do, it's going to say, if everything goes well, finished 10 writes. Finished 10 writes, which is exactly what we did with Mongo. It's exactly what we did with lots of stuff. It gives us, instant stuff. And if I close this up, right, then we should be able to see, if we refresh this altogether, we should be able to see online, which is the most important part. If I go up online, I should see all these lovely documents right here, which is I'm hoping you should have done by now. These are all the documents already put up. This is my process. So, my friends, to be preemptive, because assignment 4 is coming, and you're going to do Firebase, right? Get that database that you used last time that includes a poster ID and all that stuff. Update it now, as soon as possible on assignment 4, so you don't have to wait. Otherwise, you're going to lose access to Firefoo, right? Because it's 14-day trial. We don't care about using this thing forever. It's just for this course, right? Now, if I was doing this in like I said, in a real world scenario, not just for our course, for data, sample data, which is what this is, I would 100% what I would do in this case is I would build a little API, program that uploads all my JSON data, so I can always reseed my test data as many times as I want, especially if I have 10,000 records, or something like that. If I have 10,000 or a lot of thousands of records that I'm uploading, I'm not going to do that like one at a time. That's going to be a pain in the ass. You're going to get mad. I'm going to get mad. Everyone's going to get mad, right? And it's going to be ugly. Here, I've got everything listed here, and it comes right from our JSON file, and there's no issues. Did you guys, were you able to do that? Eric, you good? Awesome. How about everyone else? Hitesh, you okay? Hopefully you guys are.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So this is, now we have our sample data. Okay, this is the first thing. So we have all of our sample data. Notice that the key is pretty wacky and weird, right? One thing that you have is a couple things. One, you have the key here. So this is the document key, the ID. And then you have all of your properties here on the right-hand side. You could go here and modify any of these properties right here up on Firestore, no problem. It's really that simple. It's really great, okay? But you can see that I have 10 entries here for my stuff, which is where we want to go. Okay, so I'm going to assume at this point that you're good to go. You've put together your database, and without data, we can't really do our app, which is the first part, okay? Next part, okay? And this is the part that is going to take a little bit more effort. So I'm going to go back to back here. I can close off this. By the way, if I kind of click away, kind of click here, you can see that I don't have my data here. It doesn't show up in this little app. Okay, I'm just letting you know, like, it's not perfect. Okay, like it's if I'm sure if I restarted my app, then maybe I would have this in here as a query. So if I kind of came here, yeah. See, if I close it off and start it again, there it is. There's all my data again. Okay, but that's okay. Like, for what it did for me, it saved me time coding, right? And it did everything I needed to do. Done. Closing it off. I don't need it anymore. Bye-bye. We'll use it again later, maybe next week. Next, now that I have that data, I need to start setting up my app. In order for me to set up my app, there's a couple things to do, right? First, where I would start, 100% where I would start, is set up a brand new app with Xcode for this one. And I'll talk about why. All right, so here's my Xcode. I'm going to go back to Xcode. And here's what it's going to look like in a second. We're going to get back to that. But I wanted to set up a new app. So I'm going to create a new Xcode project, okay? And here's my Xcode project. Here's my app. I'm going to click Next like normal. And here, I'm going to call it MDEV MDEV1001 in the summer 2023 semester. And then it's going to be ICE 11. Notice this is important. Take a look at your bundle identifier, my friends, because this is something you need to pay attention to as one thing that if you don't look at later on, it's going to come back to bite us. Okay, so our bundle identifier, ca.Georgian College, and in caps, MDEV1001, M2023, and so on, is our bundle identifier we need to enter on the Firestore side. Okay, so keep that in mind. Next, Swift as the language, storyboard, as we're not going to use anything else, but we could. I'm going to click next. And where is it going to go? It's going to go into ICES. So I'm going to go back into here. I'm going to put it here under ICES. I'm going to click create. And it's going to make ICE 11. I'm going to remove a couple things to prepare because we're going to do some funky stuff here now. I'm going to remove Mac. I don't care about Macs. I don't care about iPads. I'm just going to do iPhone. Okay. Notice my bundle identifier is hard-coded here, but I can change it if I wanted to by going here if I need to. All right, that's important for us to do. All right, so I'm not going to change anything, but that's where it would be. I have my view controller, and my view controller is pretty ugly right now. It doesn't do anything. And I also have my storyboard, but it doesn't do anything. So what do I normally do? Close this off, please. Close this off. Now that we've made our app, just like normal, we're going to use our, we're going to use our workaround, which is using Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to bring up Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to drag and drop ICE 11 in there, please. Please drag and drop ICE 11. There it is. All right, a couple things to note. I have given you everything you need to get going. Everything. All right, so let's go back to our content. Right, and if I go to weekly content, and if you go to week 12 here, you're going to see a bunch of files. Okay, the first file that I want to get is our main storyboard gist. Okay, so I'm going to go here and copy this. By the way, I'll do that on the Mac side. I'm just going to run Mac full screen now, just to do this, because otherwise, if we don't, I know I'm going to go crazy, and you're probably going to go crazy looking at me going back and forth. So again, what I meant was you're going to go to your weekly contents, and yours might look closer to this, right? So you might have a lot of stuff here. I want to start off with the first thing, which is our Firestore main storyboard. That's the gist that I want. So I'm going to kind of copy the link and go up here and paste it in, and I'm going to get that first one. Okay, so this is our Firestore, everything else. Notice it says Firestore main storyboard. I just put it there so that we wouldn't clobber the other storyboards we've done in the past, okay? But clearly this isn't going to work like this, right? We're just going to copy the raw stuff in here. So I'm going to grab this raw stuff, copy it, go back to Visual Studio Code, take a look at my base project main storyboard, select it all, right, and paste it in, just like we've done in the past. There's nothing for you to change there because I've already coded it with ICE 11. Okay, save. Number 1. 2, let's start formulating our other project components. So I'm going to right click here on ICE 11, and I'm going to make a new file. And that file is going to be called Firestore CRUD View Controller. Firestore, lowercase, CRUD View Controller.swift. And if you don't know where that is, right, as an example, again, just going to go back out of here, and I'm just going to go look at all my stuff. You can see all of them here. So Firestore main storyboard is what we want. We want the Firestore CRUD view controller that's right here. And again, all I'm going to do is I'm going to grab all this raw file stuff. Here it is. I'm going to select it all, copy, go back, and paste it in. Save. I'm doing this offline. I'm constructing my application just like we did before in Visual Studio Code, which is going to save you a pile of time and headache. All right. Otherwise, you're going to see errors all over the place. This way, there's no errors. And right click here. I'm going to add a new file. I'm going to call this the Add Edit Firestore View Controller. So Add Edit Firestore View Controller.swift. Again, going back to our files here, you're going to see that up on Blackboard, you're going to see that other gist. Add, edit, Firestore, view controller, is the gist. We want to go there, select all, copy it, go back, paste it in. There it is, save. Those are the two main files we care about, but we have other ones. Let's add the rest in. So, new file. Okay, we're going to call this movie.swift. That is our model. Our model class is, back out here. I've changed it slightly, and I want to talk about this. I called it Firestore Movie Swift, but you can just, if you get this from the link, the reason why is because now our document ID is an optional string, and that's new. And I wanted to keep the original there just in case someone was in there trying to recreate some of these things later. Right, so that's this, save. Notice it's still codable, and that's all it is. That's very good. Now we have our movie table view cell, if I'm not wrong, is what I made it. And I'm going to go back to the content here because this is all required stuff. There's a movie table view cell.gist. I'm going to copy that one, and it's going to go in here directly and go back in there. There's my table view cell. I'm just going to grab this part, movie table view cell.swift. Copy. Back to this. New file. Movie table view cell.swift. You're going to say, last time we didn't do this, Tom. Last time you gave us, like an entire project. Yeah, but it won't work this time because my files are tied to my project online, and your files need to be tied to your project online, which is a totally different thing. You can't use my API anymore. Gotta say that, but you are going to use my API for part of it, but the other part is going to be yours. That's why you have to recreate this app. All right, save. So now we have some of these. We still got more to add. So we need to add the login, API login view controller, and the API register view controller. Those are the next ones we have to add in. So again, up here, new file, API login view controller .swift. Okay, and again, back to this. I'm going to go back out and to here. Here's the old stuff. There's the API login view controller. I'm just going to grab all that. It's the same from last week. Nothing's changed. But we need to separate it a little bit because we got to talk about this. Okay, and the last one, if I believe, is the API register view controller as I construct my app.swift. All right, and back to this. Carry us back. Back. I'm going to go into my register view controller here. You would do it from Blackboard, so you might be a little slower, maybe a little faster than me because I'm an old guy. You never know. And I'm just going to grab all this. That's not changed. Go back and paste. Right. Go back, I said, and paste. I think that's all. Let's just check it on Blackboard. So again, just going to Blackboard here for a second. I got my Firestore credit view controller. I did that. Check. I got my add edit Firestore view controller. Check. I got my Firestore main storyboard. Check. I did my app delegate. Oh, this is one I didn't do. My app delegate swift.gist. Let's go there for a second. That's something I need to change. So one thing about Firebase, when you set this up for the first time, is that your app delegate has to be modified slightly, only slightly. I'll show you the modifications. There's two things you can do. You can copy the entire app delegate.swift, this whole file, and replace what you have with this. But I want to point out where the changes are. One, we're importing Firebase Core. Okay, we're doing that. Firebase Core is imported. And the other thing we're doing is we're adding in this Firebase configuration, kind of call that's in our application did finish loading, launching with options function. This is a lifecycle function that actually works. And we've also added in this window thing where var window is equal to UI window. All right, so there's some stuff here. The easiest thing is for just to copy the app delegate code altogether. So copy it. And then go back to our app and go to our existing app delegate.swift. Here's the existing app delegate.swift. Select all and replace it with the code that I just gave you. That's the easiest thing to do. Okay? And we don't need our view controller.swift anymore because the view controller has been destroyed. So please go here and delete that file. So delete the view controller. Just a regular view controller. All right, now we have everything we need to put up on Xcode. We have another step, but we have to put all these files in Xcode now. Let's do that. So once, hopefully you're with me. Are you with me? Have you done some of this? Should I slow down? I mean, all I did was just take the GIFs and put them in there, but you should be here with me right now, approximately. Couple steps. This is just to create the project for us, right? And we should be closer to getting it done. Hitesh, how are we doing? You're good? You're ready to go? You got everything done?
Yep.
Wonderful. How about Jason? You can use the chat, Jason. Instead of like, take a look at the chat here. I thought I saw Indu for a very brief time, but maybe I was wrong. All right. How about Eric? Are you with me yet?
Just about. I'm just finishing up a couple of the controllers.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah.
I had a quick question. So, like, is Firefoo like a product of Firebase as well, or is it third party?
What is it? Firefoo?
Yeah.
That's some random fire thing that I found. It's completely random.
Why have they made it so complicated for their own platform?
No, they didn't make it complicated. They made it expensive. It's very easy. If you pay, it's totally very easy to do stuff, right? But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to make it so that you guys have no cost. That doesn't make sense for us, right? And so I'm using Firefoo because it's a kind of little app that I found. Okay. Now, if you were doing a lot of manipulation, right, with Firebase, you could also use, and I got to put my hand up here, you can also use some Firebase CLI stuff, right, that's built into Visual Studio Code. Again, there's more coding involved, there's stuff to do, and it doesn't make sense for us. So I'm not doing that because that's not our focus. I need to move on from adding data. You know what I'm saying? Our data adding is done. We don't have to worry about that anymore.
Thank you.
All right. So now that I've got this, I'm going to go back to our Xcode. Hopefully you're with me on this. And I'm going to relaunch our ICEs, right? Now, one thing to note is there's no more view controller.swift. We need to delete that reference, right? And we need to add in, so here's our main storyboard, but my main storyboard is broken because you can see that there's no view controllers right now. So let's add them back in. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to say add files, right, to the project. And it's going to open up the files. And we literally need to add the files here. I'm going to add in a few files at a time. So these ones, add them in. I'm going to do it again. And you can do it in one blow. Add files. When it feels like it. So ICEs, let's go back to ICE for a second. Go back into ICE 11, and then in there. So we need to add in Firestore Quick Controller, right? This one there. And we have to add the other ones in there too. Add files. Movie.swift, I got to add in. And the movie table view cell, I got to add those two in there now. And then add files, right? And we should have everything now that's in place. So these are all the files that we added in. So you should have all these in place now. Okay. Those are all the files. Our app delegate should have been modified, which we had, no problem. And so far, so good, but it's going to cause us an issue if we try to run it, because guess what? We don't have Firebase. We have no Firebase anywhere, right? Even though it's doing things like importing Firebase. For example, in my app delegate .swift at the top, it says import Firebase core. We can't do that. We need to add a package to get this done. And this is the next step. Okay, so first step is we created our app. Okay, that's the first step. Next step is we need to import the packages. Okay, let's do this packages now. I'm just going to wait for a second just to make sure you guys are good. Are you with me? Have you added have you reconstructed your project in Xcode? If you are, thumbs up, or you can come on and say, I'm done, right? Or you can put it in the chat if you can't speak. Thank you, Hitesh. But I want to make sure that everyone's with me, because this is critical if you want to use the time in class, as opposed to, I got to take another drink. Thanks, Janak. Good, Raheel. Thank you. Guessing Eric is diligently working to get it done. Jason is typing.
Yeah, I just file.
You what? You missed a file? Okay.
Yeah, I missed the correct file.
Okay, you good now?
Switch it.
Yeah. All right, and let's move on. So now that I've got this, that's nice, but guess what? I can't run this project ever unless I add in my next piece. So I'm going to go here into Chrome, and I want to go back into Firebase for a second. So this is where we're going to do the mapping like we talked about before. So back to the console, back to our project that we made, which is this one right here, right? And now this is where it gets a little bit, we're going to change some stuff, all right? So one thing is we have our project, right? And it talks about all the things that we can do, right? But notice it says get started by adding Firebase to your app. So if you go to project overview, right, as an example, this is where this comes into play, right? Now you can see that we've got these options here: iOS, we got Android by default, and we've got web plus Unity and Flutter. Those are the ones we have here, right? But we want to add an app. So I'm going to click on iOS, clearly. In the next one, when you do yourself, you're going to add your own Android version. But for now, we're going to click on iOS, okay? iOS, now this is where it gets critical to do stuff right. One, your bundle identifier is one thing that you want to do here. So to be safe, get the bundle identifier from your app and copy paste it in here. Or if you remember, write it in. So again, that means going to Xcode, going to the top where your Xcode stuff is, and I've got my bundle identifier ready to go here where I'm going to copy it. Right, and again, the reason why I'm seeing it this way is because I went to here, right? And notice it has, I can have signing capabilities and all that kind of stuff that I wanted. And then there's resource tags. Remember how all this goes: info and build settings and blah, blah. These are all the targets. And then the project itself, it talks about, the basic version and the info for the project. And the info of the project shows that the iOS 16.4 is happening here and blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to go back to info, right? So you can see these are just plist files is what this is, right? So, and that kind of gives you the bundle identifier here, which was what we're looking at, right? So it's 16.4, but I want to look at the target, which is the bundle identifier. I'm just going to grab this piece, I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to go back to here and paste it in, okay? So your bundle identifier must match exactly, it's case sensitive, okay? Next, what is a quick thing of calling my app? I'm going to call this MDEV1001 M2023 ICE11, okay? My App Store ID is optional, but you can give it a special ID of your own. I'm not going to do that here, but you could, all right? And then you'd register your app. Now this is where I might get some special effects happening because I've already registered this app before. So I might go, meh, sorry, you've already registered this thing. Let's see what happens. Register. It's going to take a second. Okay, everything worked. Now, here's the next step. Once you've registered, notice, see I'm in step 2? I'm in step 2. I've registered my app with the proper bundle identifier. The next step is what it says here. We need to download the Google Service Info plist, and we need to put it inside of our files, inside of my application, whatever that application is called. In our case, MDEV1001, M2023 11, right? So I'm going to click on this download button, and what it's going to do is it's going to download, right, the special plist. It's got to go somewhere, okay? So download, right? Where we want to find it is somewhere in downloads. That's where we want it to put it, right? So it's going to ask me where I'm going to put it. It says, where do I want it? I want it in downloads. I'm going to click save, right? And then in downloads, if I click downloads, you're going to see my bundle identifier, right? Which is right here, this one. See this? Google Service Info plist, right? I'm going to go back into Xcode to bring up my my Google Service, this plist here. I'm going to drag and drop it into the project, okay? And it's going to say, do you want to add it in here, as an example. It also, you want to actually say copy items if needed, all right? So that way you can copy it in here. I'm going to click finish, and it's going to give me that Google info-playlist plist. Okay, that's what this thing does. It is a XML file that gives you my client ID, as well as my reverse client ID, as well as my API key, as well as a bunch of stuff here. Okay, so a lot of information. I'm sharing it with you. Realistically, this is just a demo app, so it's not going to hurt me, but you wouldn't want to share this information in real life. Okay, but that is my Google info plist, and that's going to identify your app as the one that you're going to be using. Okay, next. Now that we've done that, let's continue. So it says, okay, that's the next part. Next, let's go to click next. Is the next button over here. When I click next, it says, let's add my Firebase SDK. That's the next part. All right, so again, I want to copy this little link right here. This little link right here that's in step 3. I'm going to click copy. And then I'm going to go into Xcode, and at the top where it says file, I'm going to go to add packages. Okay? File, add packages. Don't worry, Jason, not yet. When I click add packages, on the right where it says search or enter package URL, on the right, you're going to right click and paste that in. Okay? And you're going to see Firebase iOS SDK. I'm going to pause here for a second. Are you with me? Eric's good. How about the rest of you guys? Hitesh, let me check with Jason. Are you okay now? Good. Janik is good. Right. Thank you, Hitesh. Okay. Put on my side. Good. Thank you. So why do I need to do this? Because this is like a package manager. I'm using the Swift package manager, right? Thanks, Jason. The Swift package manager, because what I'm doing here is with the Swift package manager, it's way better than CocoaPods, because that's how we used to do it, all right, before, CocoaPods. And man, I always had trouble with CocoaPods. I hated CocoaPods. I wanted to strangle someone because of CocoaPods, all right? Here, there's no CocoaPods anymore. It's Swift package manager. Thank God, thank goodness they changed it, right? Now, next, I'm going to click add package. Okay, this is the next part. When I click add package, it's going to basically fetch the Firebase package from the registry. That's what it's going to do. All right. Now, there's going to be a lot of little sub packages or components you can add into this package. You don't need to add all of them, right? Because it's quite big. So here's what it's going to look like now. It's going to look like something like this. Take a look, right? You don't need all this stuff. We're not using Firebase Analytics, so I'm not going to choose any of this Firebase Analytics stuff. Okay, we're not doing any of this stuff. Right? We will need Firebase Auth. We will need that next week. And because I'm going to continue with the project from this week to next week, please choose Firebase Auth. Okay, that's the first thing. It also says Auth Combined Community. We don't need. Just Firebase Auth is good enough. Next, Firebase Database. I don't need it, but I'm going to click it and Firebase Database Swift, because we may elect to try some stuff out with Firebase database as well. Okay, so Firebase database, Firebase database Swift, and auth so far, those three. Next, Firestore and Firebase Firestore Swift. We need those as well. Swift gives us additional functions. All right. So again, so far there's 5 libraries: auth, database, database Swift, Firestore, and Firestore Swift. Okay. There are other ones you could add in if you really wanted to. Like for example, ML. If I wanted to do any kind of machine learning model, like there's a ton of little really cool applications here, and you can find all of them. I'm not going to do all this stuff. The only one I care about is Firebase Auth, Firebase Database, Firebase Firestore. Okay, and then I'm going to click on Add Package. When I do that, it's going to add all the dependencies right here on the left. So after this, Jason's problem of, hey, I can't find Firebase, it won't be an issue. Okay. Now, again, I'm asking, what was that?
I want to make sure I got the right.
Yeah, so you can open it up. If you I'll open up Firebase for you so you can see it. You want to do Firebase Auth, Firebase Database, Firebase Database Swift, and Firebase Firestore, and Firestore Swift. Those are the 5. Okay. All right, so now we have Firebase. We have a bunch of other stuff here, Google Utilities, and comes with a bunch of little things, little libraries here to help us with everything. Promises and Swift protobuf and a bunch of stuff. All right, can I move on? Hitesh, you good? Let's go back to the list again. And Jason, are you good now? And who else? Janak, you okay? Drew? Eric, you good? Good.
Yeah.
Excellent. So now that we have this is a great time, a fantastic time to put this on GitHub, right? Because we had a lot of stuff here, right? And I don't want to crap out with stuff. That would be very terrible if we somehow something happened and my little studio crapped out. So I'm going to go here into Visual Studio Code, and on the left, you're going to see that there's a bunch of stuff, and we see the Google Service Info plist here. Again, what it looks like is just an XML document. It looks like this. That's what it actually looks like, right, that we have. So again, we can close off all these documents, and we can do this, and we can go back into Control Backtick, which gives us our little command line. And we can just say git add dot git commit -m. We'll say added project files for ICE11. Okay. And then git push, we'll push everything up. Now, if it doesn't solve your problem, because you see this little star here still, which I don't like when I see the star. Star for me when I'm using my little terminal, iTerm, tells me there's something still left to do. So I'm going to kind of clear that, go up one level, and then do a git add dot git commit -m. It'll say updated project project files. And then git push. So this kind of adds any additions and deletions and stuff like that, and it kind of updates our main project file. Back to MDEV1001, M2023, ICE11, right? Okay, now that we've done that, we need to run our project because we want to check to see if it works, right? And I'll show you how it does things, and we'll talk about it afterwards. And I'll take a short break after this, after we run it and make sure it works. I'll talk about how it works, okay? Which is important for you to understand. All right, so let's run this thing. So let's see if it works for me. Maybe it's not going to work at all. Maybe I'm missing something, whatever. Actually, I better stop it. I already see a problem. iPhone 14 Pro can't be. It's got to be iPhone 14 Pro Max, right? Because that's what we're getting used to looking at. One other thing you should check before you run it is your main storyboard. Make sure that it's all connected properly. And what I mean by that is, take a look at your files here, and then take a look that they're mentioned correctly and all that kind of stuff. They're good to go. But now we can try and run it. To me, it looks good. I'm going to press play, and hopefully it's going to work just fine. Build succeeded, and you should see your login screen in a second, right? If everything goes well. There's my login screen. Okay, so now after I got my login screen, wait a minute. The login, we never did login. We just did Firestore. Remember? We're going to talk about this in a second. This still connects to your API from last week, okay? But it's kind of a weird way of creating authentication. Here is an example of a microservice. Imagine that we're using the same API for login, right? Authentication, which is totally different than Firestore on the back end. We're using our API just for authentication purposes, and that's it. This actually is a use case for this, which is a microservice that all it does is authenticate us. And it's the same authentication that we're going to use as an example with our web app, with other stuff, right? Totally viable way of doing things. So here I'm going to log in. That hasn't changed. None of this stuff has changed, right? We click login, and then it should take us to the main screen. Now, if everything works well, then it shouldn't crap out. It should take you to the main screen, and everything should be good, right? And if it doesn't, right, like it's not doing right now, we'll check to see what the problem is. Okay? So I am getting an error, right? And it says error encoding and blah, 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 and type mismatch for all this stuff. I didn't get that before, right, on my version. This is what I'm telling you. Remember I was saying sometimes it takes a little bit of time to fix all this problem? Well, here's the problem that I got. Did you guys get this problem too? Identical code that I copy pasted, but still we're getting this issue. Must be a reason for this, right?
Yeah,
And
same issue.
same issue, good. So we're at least on the same issue problem, right? Because it worked just fine for me. But let's take a look at what it did. So one thing it did for us in the simulator is it didn't give us anything, right? So there's nothing here, right? And it says type mismatch, Swift array, any Swift decoding error context. Let's take a look and see what happened. Okay, so I was going to take a break, but let's try and see if we can fix this error. This error is in my Firestore CRUD view controller Swift. Let's go there. So, and I'm going to stop this little function from happening. So how does this work, first of all? So let's go back to my movie.swift. Here's movie.swift. So movie.swift, everything's the exact same as we've seen before, except that we have this document ID. This is a new thing, the new kid on the block, the document ID. The rest is the same. There's nothing different there, right? And let's go to movie table view cell. Movie table view cell, exactly the same, right? No issues. One thing we should check to see is everything connected. I think so. Because, I mean, you know, even though we didn't see anything here, right? I mean, it didn't kind of cough out anything. So let's take a look at our main storyboard and let's see what happens with this part. So if I click on this, and if I was to look at the assistant editor, you know, as an example, you can see that they're all connected. All these things are still okay. Even though they don't show connected inside of things, like it's not a connection issue. We know that for sure. So that's the first thing. Next, let's go back to my Firestore CRUD view controller. So the next part is we make an array of movies, right? Array of movie type. We make it an empty array. Here we're going to do the fetch movies from Firestore method, which actually, if you look at it, is almost identical to what we had last week, all right? And where we get issues, fetch movies from Firestore, right, is this part right here, okay? This is the part where we're kind of trying to fetch movies, all right? And really, at the end of the day, we're going to take the movies that we fetched, which is these ones right here, and we're going to try and fetch the movies and append to the movie database, which is, so append to movie, the movie itself, one movie, right, is this movie document. We fetch our movies. Fetch movies is the one that we got. So this is our fetch movies array. And we're going to take the fetch movies and we're going to append the movie to the fetch movies array. And this fetch movies array is a temporary array that we're using locally to get all the movies when we can. Okay? It didn't come to here. It didn't give us an error here. It gave us an error from, this is coming from Firebase. from Firebase, right? So the error we're getting, and the reason why we're getting 10 of these is because for each time we go out and try and run this little app, we get this little error, okay? We're going to come back to this. Let's go back to the Firebase, to this part. We haven't finished, right? We haven't finished this part yet. So that's the first part. Let's click next. Then it says, how do you want to initialize your code? Either through Swift or through Swift UI or Swift. I'm going to click Swift. So here's Swift. We added in this little code. We had our Firebase configuration here in our app delegate. And then I'm going to click next. And then it's going to say, continue to console. You're all set. Continue to my console. All right, there we go. So that should be your completion of your app. That's important to do. Next, what we want to look at with our app is the Firestore database. What does it look like, and what is it talking about? What is the issue that we're getting? Like when we're loading stuff in, what is the problem? This is important, okay? Let's go back and check it out. So back to our app. It says, let's read it. Decoding movie data, type mismatch with Swift array, any, Swift decoding error, coding keys, string value, genres, it says, int value is nil, right? And then debug description, expected to decode array, any, but found a string data instead. So what do you think the problem is? We're going to find this problem. So, and it's with genres. That's the one we have. So going back to our movie.swift, is genre an array of strings? It is. So is directors, so is writers, so is actors. Nothing here has changed. Okay, none of these have changed so far, right? And so that's weird that that's happening. I didn't expect this error, right? So this is kind of a little bit of troubleshooting we have to do. This is new. Normally I don't do troubleshooting with you guys because it takes forever, right? But we need to do this. And the good thing about it is you can help me out, right? You can use any tool you want to help me troubleshoot. You can use ChatGPT, you can use the web, you can use whatever. But we're going to figure this out together. Let's go into our Firestore Credit View controller and try and figure it out by looking at it. All right, so first of all, we have a document. And we take a look at our snapshot. And where is the snapshot coming from? This is all the code that we're getting from Firebase, right? So really what we're saying is we want to get a snapshot, and we're getting the snapshot here from the DB collection. Okay, that's what's happening. So here's our DB collection, movies. That's the movies collection. We're going to get documents. We're going to get the snapshot of the documents. And then we're going to say, okay, fine. From the documents, we're going to say for every document in their snapshot documents, we're going to loop through. This is our little loop right here, right? And this little loop here that we're going to do is going to loop through for every document. I'm going to get my data, my document.data, and then in the document data itself, this is where I'm going to parse everything. So I'm going to say, okay, fine, movie, try to use the Firestore decoder to decode the movie from the data, all right? That's the first thing that's going to happen. So there's that movie part right here. Now let's see if I was going to put in a print statement. Let's do a print statement in there. And if I printed my movie, just that little movie for me for the first time, what do I get? Do I get nil? Right? So this is where I would start. And let's run it. So again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to log in again. And it says, here we go. My connection, da, 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 da. Okay, take a look. So it says, we logged in successfully. This is just connection stuff, connection protocol stuff. And it says, so where was that? Did we even get there is the question. So we got this error. This is a decoding error, right? And we got it 10 times. But did we ever get to our little print statement? Did we ever get to this? We actually did a do catch, right? And it says error encoding, decoding movie data. We got to this part. So it actually skipped out of this part. Couldn't even do this at all, right? Couldn't even do this stuff. All right, cool. So it says, well, we are expecting a type mismatch, a Swift array any, right? And a Swift decoding error, it says context, and the coding path is for the coding key, string value genre, int value nil, right? And then my debug description is expected to decode an array of any, but found a string of data instead. Okay, so that's what this part is right here. So we got our data, and we're expecting one thing, and we're getting another thing. All right? But why? How can we get the string instead from our online database? Let's check now the next piece, which is we check our data. So genre, let's take a look here. Genre is actually wrong. Look, when we uploaded our data, take a look at this. We actually got, when we did our with our little stupid app, remember that stupid app we were using, right? And we did this. Take a look. We actually got, it's actually correct. My data is wrong, right? It's not my code that's wrong. It's my data that's wrong, right? And so you can see that this is the problem. Look, actors is this. This isn't right. It should be arrays. Should it not? Remember that original thing we got? This is wrong, guys. So we need to drop this collection, okay? And we're going to use that little crappy little program again, right? Firefoo. And let's take a look at that Firefoo program, right? So here's my new project. Here's my test project. Take a look at my test project. See how that I had like actual arrays, right? But here I didn't have arrays. I had like this kind of stuff. Well, there's a reason for this, right? And here's the reason. Because my in-class exercise 6 had just strings. We parsed the strings and we put it into my core data, right? So it did what it actually asked it to do, but it did it wrong. Let's try this again. So let's just delete this thing, right? So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to drop the whole collection. I'm going to go here and I'm just going to delete all of these things and delete all the sub collections. Let's do that, right? And now that it's dead, it's deleted. You can go back and you can see there's no data in here. Let's add it back in, but let's use the right file this time, right? And just to help you, I'm going to put a file up on Blackboard to help us out because I have a file that is useful, right? That's just my badness. This is me being dumb, right? I'm going to go web link, and I'm going to say, sorry, web link. I'm going to add another file. Just to make it easy for us. We have it already, and I'm sure you can get it too, but that's the problem. The problem is my data's bad, all right? I'm like, wait, I didn't do anything wrong. Everything is perfect. But actually, it's some good troubleshooting for us. That's okay, right? So where is my file that's good? I'm just going to find it and put it up for you guys. And I think I had it on our API. I had another version of it too. I'm not wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Right? Oh, there it is, movies.json. And I'm just going to drag this up and submit. Oh yeah, we need a name. Call this movies.json. There we go. This way you can download it from Blackboard. You don't have to look around. So it's the last file that I just put up here. You can grab it from Blackboard. And if you actually look at the movies.json file, you can take a look at it actually here, if I'm not wrong, on the web. When it decides to come down, the pipe. If Blackboard allows it, it may not. Oh, it was there for a second. There it is. And notice here now, they're all arrays, right? And they're not dumb like how I made it before. Good. So now this is the right data. And now I'm going to use my little silly app, this thing, and I'm going to import again. So right click, and I'm going to go import. And this time I'm going to put the right data, not the wrong data like I did before, which is, again, it's a good exercise. I'm fine with it. You know, it's just unnecessary for us to do it that way. And again, I'm going to go into my desktop and I'm going to look at my API, which is probably where I should have looked, movies.json, and then click select. And it's going to show me the data. I just ran through this really quickly, but I shouldn't have. I should have ran through the data a little bit more carefully and click import. And then now you can see that I read everything in. And if I go back to my project, you can see now that I've got arrays instead of strings up online. See, Firebase doesn't care. It'll take whatever you give it, right? And this is an example of where I messed up, but we're fixing our problem, okay? Back to our Xcode project. And now I don't need the print movie thing anymore because I'm confident, hugely confident, that we're going to make this work. Because I couldn't find any error in my code. I was like, this didn't make any sense, right? How come it failed? And I'm just going to run this thing again. And now we should get our data. Let's take a look. Hopefully, we're going to be fine. So here I'm going to come in. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Going to log in. And data. Right? Data. Okay, I need to take a drink. This is worthy of a drink now. Throat. Knives. Okay. So now you can see that there's data here, but we should do some tests. So for your demo that you're going to do your demo video, test this out to make sure it works. So we need to add a movie. Let's add one in. You should add one for you as well, right? And I'm going to call this movie ID 99. My title is going to be movie title. My studio is going to be movie studio. I'm going to add in a couple of genres. So I'm going to say action and adventure. Okay, with a comma between them to indicate that it's an array. All right, and directors is going to be, we'll make a couple of directors here. I'll say it's going to be Hitesh. He's this famous director. I don't know if you know Hitesh, but he's this fantastic director, Hitesh. And I'm also going to use Dhruv because, you know, he's here, right? So Dhruv, you're going to be the director. What was that?
So that I love Hitesh's work. Like,
Hitesh's work is good, exactly, right? And even Jason's work, we'll say Jason Chan, right, is also the other director. So there's 3 directors here, not just one, right? And they directed it in different places. In India, one in Toronto, another one in Hong Kong. Okay, that's what we did, all right? And for this crazy movie we made, right? We're going to say Eric is our writer, right? Because, you know, Eric is the man of the hour when it comes to a writer, right? And Eric, I always forget your last name. Where the heck is it? Oh, here it is, Donald. And then actors with a C. Damn it, Eric. You're making my life difficult. All right, and then actors. Okay, we got actors now. So we'll say that we have a couple of actors here. We have Gautam C. Hamsai. Why not? And we're also going to have a couple. Janek is the other guy. Or the other person. There we go. Jamal. Janek. I can't even type anymore. There we go. And then the length is going to be 120 minutes. The year is going to be, it was last year's movie, okay? 2022 that we made. And movie description, we'll leave it as movie description. MPA rating, we'll make it G. And critics said it was okay, but it needed some work. Okay, so sorry, Hitesh. I mean, I know you're one of the famous, you know, directors here, but your work just didn't make it last year. You got a 6, right? And then afterwards, okay, here's the beautiful thing. If I click in add, we should see that movie somehow. There it is. There's my movie title and movie studio. You can see that it was added into our project, right? And if I click on here, you can see that I got all my details, right? I got an array of objects back, my movie studio, action, adventure. Let's see what this looks like on Firestore. So back to Firestore, and you can see we're going to see if we can find our one. Notice it doesn't come in any order. It comes in whatever order Firestore feels like it. And that's totally fine with me, right? You'd think it's like the last one, but it may not be, right? Here it is. Look, it's not. It's like down here, right? And you can see here, I've got my couple actors. Hopefully I spelled everyone's name right. I got a few directors. I got a couple genres here, right? You know, got my description and my movie title, and there's my writer. right? And you can see that all of it was done correctly, right? If that makes sense. Okay, so that's good. Back to Xcode, right here it is. And everything is fantastic, right? That it worked quite like that. And now we need to go back to our simulator and let's see if we can do an update. So we're going to change movie from ID of 99. We're going to make it ID of 90. Small change. Okay, and we're going to change our movie title to, you know, Hitesh's Adventure Movie 1. I'll say part 1. Right? Because maybe they're going to come up with a part 2 in a couple years. I don't think so. But we'll see. Maybe. Update. Right? And you can see Hitesh's Adventure Movie Part 1. It's good. It did the update. Let's see what it did. Now, we have to verify. Why? Because I always want to verify online with Firestore. Remember what it does is it updates the database and the table view here, but it may not update properly. Let's check. So back on Firestore, right? And you can see that if I scroll down, there's Hitesh's Adventure Movie Part 1 right there. It's changed, the title. And this is proof that everything is working. I want you guys to show me that stuff when you're doing your demo. Show it. Like, test it out. This is what you would do if you're making your own app. Show it for me for my app. Let's delete it now. What happens? Okay, so I'm going to go back to my simulator, and I'm going to do the delete. So I'm going to kind of do one of these. I'm going to say delete, and then I'm going to say click delete, and we can watch it in real time as it disappears. Okay? Full crap. And we're good. Now, this would have taken us, typically, if we were doing this in the very beginning, right, back in the day when we started doing stuff with Thing, it may have taken us a couple weeks to get done, right? Because a lot of little operations, try to explain everything. But now you guys have done this app over and over again with different backends, right? So I'm not going to go through all that little nitty-gritty stuff that we did before. However, we need to talk about how this all works. I was going to take a break, but oh well. Let's just keep going. If you guys are okay with that. I was panicked. I was like, wait, something happened. How did we not troubleshoot? How is not working? There's nothing for you to troubleshoot. It's just me. I just made a mistake with my data. Couple things to note that won't happen right now, okay? Part 1, if I remove my data, like someone else removed my data, there's no notification that the data has been removed. We don't have that system in place, okay? So if something changed on my live database where I'm sharing my data with 4 or 5 people, right, the only way that's going to be updated is if you reload your app, okay, right now. Or if I have some kind of reload button to reload and pull my data back. There's no push notification going on. We haven't established that yet. We'd have to have some kind of webhook to create that or use the notification system. Now, the great thing about this is that because we're using Firestore, Firestore has some built-in stuff to help us out, okay? But for today, remember, this is not our exercise. Our exercise today is basic, right? Which is what we've got done. Next, let's talk about this. So, as I said, we get our DB collection. So DB is from Firestore. We use the Firestore object, and we have the sub-object called Firestore. Now, they could have named it differently, but that's what they did, okay? DB collection. So DB is the object. Collection is what we're looking at. We're putting the collection in brackets, movies, okay? The movies collection. We're going to get a set of documents. When we do the get documents, it's going to create we're going to kind of do that for all the documents in the collection is what we're doing. There's 2 objects you get, the snapshot object and you get the error object. If there's an error, then the first thing you want to check to see if there's an error getting access to the documents, okay? And it'll output the type of error, just like we saw earlier, right? We didn't have trouble getting the documents, right? It wasn't error fetching the documents. It was error decoding the documents. That was the problem, which is another type of error, right? Next, here I have a temporary movie array called fetch movies. Why? Why didn't we just put it here in our movies array directly? How come? Because if I did, and if there was an issue, right, it would crash my application, right? No crashing. This is done, kind of right here. And this way we can play with this temporary in-memory array that we're going to use while this thing is running. And the next thing is, once we've got our fetch movies, then we need to make a loop of some kind to run through all the movies and kind of append them to the array, right? An array of movie types. But in order for us to do that, we need to take, for every document, it's a for each loop, for every document in documents, and we're going to look at snapshot documents to get that. So snapshot is what we get from the documents up on Firestore. For every document in documents, we're going to say that the data, let data, is equal to the document data. So the document itself, remember, is made up of a complex piece of data. It's not just one property. It's an object of properties because it's NoSQL, which means we have arrays. We've made it very complex. Arrays, we got some strings, we got some integers, we got a double, we got lots of stuff, right? We need to match the data because we've serialized the data and we put it up on Firestore. We need to deserialize and decode that data and compare it with our movie model that we've created. And we need to deserialize it in a way that we can understand, right? So that's what this decoder does. So what decoder does is it takes it, Firestore decoder is JSON data by default equivalent, and it's going to compare the movie model. So if I kind of if I was going to look at the decode method, right, you're going to see it takes two arguments. One of them is the model, and the other one is the data that you're going to decode, right? And what it's going to try and do is going to take a look at each of the documents in my database, Firestore, and match it against the model, right? Does that make sense? If it does, it'll decode it and store it in the movie instance. This is the object, right? If it doesn't, it'll crap out and it'll go to the catch statement. And this is where we got that error decoding part from, right here, because it couldn't do it. It couldn't match the data with the movie. The data online was strings. The movie object was looking for array of strings, and that's where it crapped out, okay? Then, once we do that, now this is important, it doesn't have the movie ID by default. And this is weird, right? You'd expect that it would, right? And the reason why it doesn't is because the document doesn't automatically give it to you. You have to fetch it yourself. So for each document, for each movie we get, right, we want to get the document ID. The document is for every document. So why is that? Well, let's take a look at Firestore and it'll inform you. Do you see a document ID here? Is there a document ID in here anywhere here? No, the document ID is right here. It sits outside of the data. It's not like MongoDB. MongoDB had the document inside the data, right? We don't have that. The document sits outside the data. And because it does, we need to fetch it separately. We got the data, but we need the document now, right? And that's what this is. That's what this part does right here. The document has the ID, and we need to set up the document ID here from the snapshot from the documents. We need to put that in here. And once we've got that, then finally we construct the entire movie. Then we can add it to the fetch movies array. Here's something if you try to take this away. Try and take this away. If you try to take this away, you can't do an edit, you can't do a delete, you can't do those things. But you can do an add, right? Because ads don't need a document. But you can't do a delete and you can't do an update because no document. You won't have the ID. It'll be nil. All right. So that's something. Once we have that, back to what we've seen before from last. This is all old hat now from over here, right? We have in our main thread, the main thread, the running in the application. We're going to have our movies, fetch movies that we're going to set up there, and then we're going to update the table view. That's what's happening here. Update the table view. Okay. Excelente. All right. So then the rest, this part is identical. Nothing has changed here, right? Because we're still doing stuff. None of this has changed here. And even the add button press hasn't changed. Where it has changed is where we come down to the delete movie. Delete movie does exactly the thing that we did before, but we need to use Firestore functions to do it. Here's what it looks like. Again, we want to do this. We're going to say, hey, let's get that movie that we got from the index path, which means the movie ID that we pressed on, because we have a row, many rows of movies, right? And we're going to press on one of the movies, and from that movie that we're going to get, we're going to store it inside of the document ID from that movie. This is important. Once we get that document ID and it's live, then we can search for it. And this is the way it's done. Hey, DB, go to the collection that's called movies and look for the document that has this document ID. And then now delete it. It's going to create an event. And this event, the only reason why we trigger this event at all, right, is if there's an error. If there's an error, we want to print that error. Else, if not, there's no error, then I want to update the table. That's all it is. The rest is simple. So deletion is super simple. That is the simplest thing you can do, deleting, all right? Because it's just here. And the only thing we've added in is we want to check to see if you want to delete before you get here with that check that we had before when we swipe. All that stuff we did before, it's the same, okay? So that, my friends, is your Firestore CRUD View controller. It's pretty good. The most difficult part was getting this part done when I was doing it. And the part that I had challenges the most with wasn't the deletion. It was actually fetching, believe it or not. And the reason for it is because when I was encoding stuff for the first time, when I actually added the data over, it was fetching and it wasn't matching up. I was having decoding errors just like I had now. I fixed all those errors. All right. Next part, and the last thing I want to talk about today, which is my Add Edit Firestore View controller. All right. Nothing much has changed here in terms of linking to the UI. The UI is the exact same. All this stuff is the same. No problem there. All of this stuff, for the most part, is the same. Let's talk about some changes. One, again, make sure we've kind of hashed what we've done here is we've converted movie ID from an integer to a text in order for us to show, if we're editing a movie, we're going to show it inside of our user interface. So we're converting from an integer to a text object. And the same thing when we get genre or director or writers, they are a array of movies, right? Array of strings. And we're using a comma separated split function where we're actually using this function here because it's a string to store them, where they're separated. We're going to join them this time instead of splitting. We're joining them and putting together as a string, a string of names separated by commas. We're actually adding the comma in there from the split. So what we're getting genre is actually giving us an array, but we're joining everything together into one string. So array to string function is what joined does for us. All right, just like we've seen before. And so all this is pretty much the same. Here's where we get some funky stuff happening. Again, movie ID string, we've kind of decided the movie ID string is going to be of a type integer. And what we're doing here is we're creating all of the objects first. We do a little bit of pre-work to get all the objects ready because we're getting ready to do an update or we're getting ready to do an add, right? Okay, here's my DB again. Hey, DB. And I'm doing this a lot, right? I did this this is my third time I'm doing it, right? Hey, DB. Let's use the Firestore and get a reference to the Firestore and store it in our database. This is the database, the Firestore database. Okay, cool. Now, let's make a movie, right? If a movie exists, then we know we're going to do an update. If it doesn't exist, let's skip. Let's do the update first. So if we're doing an update, now here's something new. We're going to get a movie reference, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to say, okay, find in the DB collection movies, look for the document ID that already exists. And you're going to say, wait, where do we get the document ID from? Well, the document ID is going to come from the move. When we click onto it, it's going to pass the document ID across all the data that's coming across from the Firestore CRUD controller. It's going to come across here just like you normally did when we did it for our API or we did it for core data, right? So we get the ID. That's how we're searching. And this is the query that we're doing. We're saying in the movies, find that movie, find that document inside of the DB collection movies that matches the ID. That's the query right here, right? And then once we do that, we're going to say movie reference. This is the movie reference. We want to update data. We can update all the data or some of the data. We're updating it all. Why? Because it's more difficult for us to update one thing than to update all of the things. If I tried to update one thing, I'd have to detect which thing I'm updating. I don't have to do that here. I can just update all of them. Okay? And once I've done that, I'm going through, and now I'm doing it the other way around. I'm taking from my, kind of like a comma separated string, and I'm converting to an array by using the components method. So this is like split if I was going to look at it on the JavaScript side. Right? So I'm splitting up the string and assigning it to the genres object. Now, this is a funny thing that I'm making. If you notice here, I'm creating an object that I'm updating right here. This is the object that I'm updating. Notice it's an array of what it likes to be called is string any. That's just the type it likes on Swift, string any, right? Array of string any. Okay, and then we kind of put together that array based on the information that we got here from our user interface. And then once we put together that array, what we're going to do is we're going to say, if there's an error, right, then let's print out the error. If there's no error, then we're going to dismiss the this particular segue and go back to the Firestore CRUD view controller, and we're going to call the movie update callback, that was been there for a couple of weeks now, which is going to refresh the page, which is what we want. Okay. Else, if it's not an updated type of movie and we're adding a new one, and this is where I had some issues doing this as well, you have to cast this whole thing here that we're doing, which is very similar to this whole thing here. In fact, it's identical. Wow, I wonder if we could have done this differently. Well, there's a couple things that makes these two things slightly different. One, here it's inline object that we're using. Here, I'm assigning it to an kind of a variable, right? There's a reference for all this stuff signed here. There's nothing to say that I couldn't have done it the other way around, where I couldn't have done this part kind of further up and then change things around. Okay, so we probably could have saved some lines of code here, all right? But I did it this way to show you there's one difference. And the one difference is that when I add a movie, we cast it as a string any. That's what has to be done. Because Swift doesn't know this type. It's a custom type, custom object, right? Okay, here's something else I could have done. I could have made use of the movie object, right? Because here, it doesn't understand what I'm doing, right? So some other trickiness we could have done here instead. For now, I made it easy to make work. Again, there's some duplication that we can kind of maybe work out next week, but that is something that we can do. So once we've done this, then we have our new movie. Now this is the new movie we want to add. The other one was updating. Here's how you do that. You create a reference. And this reference is of type document reference. Document references comes from our Firestore type. You have to use the Firestore type for it to work, okay? Then we're going to say this reference is equal to a DB collection. We're actually using the DB collection and storing a reference to the DB collection right here. Again, one thing it says here, variable ref was written to but never read. We don't need to read it, right? What we're doing is we're adding a document to it, right? So ref is actually holding something in there. Realistically, if you think about it, we could dispense with it here and do it like this, just like kind of how we did it up here, right? DB collection movies. And then we had, check to see if it was an error down in here. We just did it a different way. So we have a reference. This is a temporary holder for a reference for our database. And we're going to say db.collection movies. Now, instead of update document, we're adding a document. Notice that the other command we used up here was, we did an update data, movie reference update data. Here we did a movie reference, a reference add data, add document. And then the document we're getting is the data we have to kind of set up the data that we're adding in, which is of type new movie. New movie was the one we just constructed. And if we get an error, then output the error. Else, if we don't get an error, just put to the console that we're good to go, right? And dismiss and go back using the movie callback to update the table. And that's it, my friends. The rest is this. A lot of it's the same, like as what we did before. There are some changes, and the changes are what you have to look for when you do your own assignment 4, where your assignment 4 is going to be eerily similar to what this looks like. Okay? Questions around this? Are you guys good? Okay. Hopefully you guys are good. Anyone hear Hitesh or Rahil? Anybody? Can you hear me? I know Eric dropped out, but can you guys hear me?
Yes, I'm good.
Awesome. Yeah, I wasn't sure. Maybe we lost Eric because he had to go, or maybe he had problems with Teams. I'm not sure. But anyways, so if you guys are good, this is what I wanted you to do. So notice there's parts that are missing, all right? And the parts that's missing here is the authentication piece. The authentication piece is what we're going to do next week. And it was hard to kind of get this going, I'll be honest, right? And it was hard because for a couple reasons. I'm just going to just drop out of this thing. Fire food. I want to talk about this for a second. Let's just drop out of this and go back to my PowerPoint for a second. So we kind of did this. We kind of created our iOS app with Firebase Firestore. We used our previous login and register. That's what we did. Mission accomplished there. We updated our CRUD screens or add screens to work with Firestore. And then now for you to do, make this work with Android. How would you do this? Okay. Well, let's go back and take a look at my Firebase and see what it looks like. So back up to Firebase, right? And I would go to my project overview here. And on the top, you can see that I have another button, Android, right? So let's get started with this, and I'll show you how this works. I'm going to create the Android side of things. I'm going to click up Android, and then in here, you put in your Android package name. So what you'd have to do before you started this off is you'd have to start the process of creating your Android app, converting from, Firebase, as an example, to this. Like, so Firestore on the iOS side, put it in ChatGPT and try and convert it. Right? Say, here's what I got on ChatGPT. It works perfectly. Convert this to something that works with Android. You can keep the same user interface that you made last week and the week before. That's not going to change. So all your layouts you kept before are the same. Okay, nothing's going to change there. And so it talks about this. You have to register your app for the first time. And then it talks about how to get into download and then add config file. You add the config file, you add your Firebase SDK, tells you where to do that, and finally you go to next steps. You follow this process, and then you've added your the pieces that you need on the Android side. The other thing to look at is when you get started. Here I've clicked on iOS. You can actually follow this a lot as well, and it'll get through. And if you scroll down, it'll even show you things like, how do I initialize my cloud Firestore? It tells you what to do. It tells you that Firebase app configure, you need to put that somewhere. And a lot of times we put that in our app delegate. Okay, that's where we put it. It gives you some example code on how to add data. And notice we did this. We said db.collection users add document, and it gave you an example of how this was done. Okay, and the same thing goes with, because it gives you all the examples here, right? So here's where I want to add another document. Here's how we read data. It talks about how to do this. DB collection users get documents, and then here what they do is a snapshot, right? That's what it is, a query snapshot or error for every. Now here what I did was for every document in documents, we had to do that because we have a special model class that we're using to show, and that's what we did here. But clearly it shows you an example of how this is done. It also talks about how to secure our data where we can where it says auth is required. We're doing that next week, right? And there's a little video tutorial here as well on how to get started. That's for iOS. For the video tutorial online, I've actually given you this tutorial here, Right here, it's called Getting Started with Cloud Firestore on iOS Firecasts video. So if you wanted to watch this, it's a good introductory video from Firebase on how this works, right? So you can take a look at that. I'm just going to move our little video that I'm making right now up here so you can see it. All right, so that's what that video is. And so you kind of do the same thing with the Android side. So if we scroll back up, we could have chosen Kotlin with Android or Java with Android. Let's do that. So here's Kotlin with Android. And you can see that they do it slightly differently, right? So here with Swift, we had kind of inline data, right? Here with Kotlin, and they created a hash map, right? Which is like kind of a, dictionary equivalent, right? So yeah, first to Ada, last to Lovelace, and born in 1815. This is the hash map. But the same, look at this, it's very similar on how they did it. One thing that's different with Kotlin compared to Swift is they do db.collection users, they add a user, and then add on success listener. So they use event handling here just to make sure that we're good. On success, then we do a document snapshot added with whatever this is. On failure, we can say error, and we can add this as a tag in our would log D goes to our Android logcat. Okay, that's what it goes to. All right, that's what this goes. And the same thing goes with if I want to create a new user, this is how it works. And if I want to read the data, this is how you would do it. You would say document.get and then add on success listener. We're going to use something like that when you make your Android. So it's slightly different than you'd use when you do an iOS app. And this is why I didn't want to go too crazy with it this week, because this is just getting this working. Like I said, with Android, it might take you a little longer. Couple reasons why. One, Firestore is updated, right? So some of the stuff that was available in 2021 when ChatGPT was out, and now there's some differences, okay, compared to what it was. They've actually recently updated too, so it may not be, you have to try a couple things to make it work, is all I'm saying. Java Android also is an option, right? So you can see that this is more wordy, but for the most part is exactly the same, okay? And they have other ones. If you want to take a look at it in C++, you can see how this looks. C++ talks to me because you're using pointers, okay? And it's actually using the DB pointer to the collection, and then we're using the add method to add an array. Look at this. It's actually very nice if you were using C++. I always wondered why, C++ wasn't really a viable option for Android and iOS. It should be another option, because C++ is perfect, right? A little more difficult language to figure out, but perfect in terms of how it works, right? And good errors too. So that's just me. But so this is something, and you can always go back if you wanted to look at Java Android. It'll replace the stuff up here if you wanted to do that. If I go back to Java Kotlin, Android Kotlin, and if I scroll down, again, there is this beginning with Firestore stuff. But if you go through it, you're going to see that there's some other videos that they have, just for how to get going. Instead of iOS, they have videos for Android as well. Okay, so that is this stuff, which gives you a lot of data. You can see here also there is examples further down on how to read data. If I was to get data, the API documentation is very clear about how to do this kind of stuff. And there's a little video on how to get data. How do I query? How do I do stuff? There's videos all over the place. One thing I love about Firebase, Firestore, and just Firebase in general is the documentation is pretty good, right, in terms of what you get. You're not going to get a lot of questions on how to do it. Let's go back to Swift for a second, and you can see that it talks about how to set the data. If I was going to kind of set it up, so here's me setting the data, and then getting a document. How do I do that, right? One thing that I wish they had more of is I wish they gave us what I've given you, which is view controllers. Here, it's just giving us examples. But unless you know how to do it, they don't have it. And here, if you look at viewcontroller.swift, take a look at that. If you kind of click on this, it'll actually take you to a code project on GitHub, right? So here's on GitHub, there's a code project, and it gives you an example of how to fetch stuff. And I used this when I was doing my stuff. I just wanted to do it my way. So that's why it kind of came out the way it did. But if you look here, here's your base project. They didn't use a model class at all. Not really. You don't see a model class that they put together, but they do have this view controller. And what they did was, so here's kind of how they put the data together. This is another way of getting that example data where they, had the example data kind of here. And what they did was, once you have this example data, they uploaded this to Firestore. This is another way of doing that, right? And this is that, write the batch of data to Firestore, and they did it through a bunch of, references. Okay, so that's how they did it. And you can see that they've got a complete example here, but I found that it was still pretty involved to go through it and read it, and that's why I went through and did it with you. Okay, so you have a good example of how, an analog or analogy of what we did with MongoDB, the API, what we did with core data, and now what we're doing with Firebase, right? Of all of them, if I was going to review all of them, right, to me, Firebase speaks to me, right? It makes sense. Clearly, our own custom API, you're going to learn how to do that next semester, is better because then we can make our own endpoint API endpoints. We don't have to worry about it. Where this, and I'm just going to end this discussion by talking about this a little bit, is how this works out if you go back to our documentation. Let me just go back to my documentation here for a second. So at the top, notice that there is Swift, but you can do this modular API thing. Right, so here's an example of a modular API. How would you do it, right? Where you would change the backend, you would import, Firebase and your Firebase Firestore stuff up at the top. When you kind of create this, you're going to create our Firebase config data, right? This is how this modular API stuff works, and then you would do. This is an example of some example data, but we would store it up on Firestore or Firebase any way we want to do it. So that's the collection. Getting a document, on the back end is literally just getting a snapshot, getting a reference, and actually, using, Node with Firebase is like super simple. And they actually give you some example here. If you actually take a look at getDocument.js, it gives you an example of how to do it here. And this is for your, your Firestore API, right? That they're using. Okay. And now it says Firestore Next because it's using Next.js. All right, let's talk about, let's go back and let's see what about if you didn't use this, if you used a namespace API, right? So this is kind of a little bit different, slightly. You can see that this is the namespace API. And if I scroll down here, right, you can see that this is another way of doing it. If I also look here, there's also Node.js, which is the API part. So if I click on Node.js, then it tells you how to put things together, how to initialize the Google Cloud, right? How we initialize our app, and it kind of talks about the index.js here and so on. And they have a complete app. If I click onto this, they have a complete app on GitHub again. So here's our app, Firebase with our path, and you can see that we have our index.js, and the index.js looks like any kind of Node.js app. Okay, that's what it looks like. We initialize our app and so on. Now, I would probably do this differently if I was going to show you. I would make it so that it works out for us, but it actually shows you a couple things you need. The Firebase JSON object, which is your rules for how you connect with Firebase. Your Firebase indexes, which is how you index stuff for your overrides. And then you just have like one file, which is your index. But there's also a package.json that talks about what you need, right? Which is your Firebase admin. They use Firebase functions here and Firestore, right? And you have dev dependency, which is your Firebase tools, and this is kind of the baseline that you would need to make things work. Some kind of Node.js app. Me personally, I would have different routes and an API, and it would work just perfect. Okay. Back to this. So questions around all of this stuff. Because it really talks about how to do it, how to put it together, and everything else. Look, guys, I'll be honest. Some of this stuff you need to do a little bit of work, all right, to get it moving. especially with Firebase. But once you get it working, especially with Kotlin Android, right, then you're going to be just fine. It's not going to be that much different. And again, where I would start off is what I talked about last week, which is I would go to my ChatGPT and say, okay, here's my controller. I'm currently using Firebase. Don't change the other stuff. The stuff that already is existing for your login and register, it's going to be the exact same. If you had login and register working last week, it's going to work the exact same way this week. The only thing you're changing now is your activity, right? So the activity that you're going to do is the thing that you're changing. I want to change this controller, and I want to use, here's my existing, you can actually even do this. Here's my Android controller, and here is an iOS controller that I use for Android activity, Android controller, and the iOS controller. I want to take this iOS controller, ChatGPT, and see here that I've connected to Firebase. I want to do this same idea here with my Android application. Can you help me? Right? And it'll do it for you. Slowly. It takes some time. There'll be some back and forth conversation with ChatGPT, but it's doable. And you have from now until Sunday to get it done. My recommendation is get the iOS portion completed, make sure it works for you, and then go right into the Android side. Okay? Questions before we go for the day? Okay, if there's no questions, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I apologize for being a little under the weather. And again, just as I said it. But I'm going to see you all next week. Now, for tomorrow, for those people that are here for tomorrow, if I still feel this way, I'm going to send out a note and I'll let you guys know that I'm going to work remotely. I'll see how it goes. Tomorrow, remember, is the testing session that we're going to be using for our the stuff. Hopefully, you're ready to go. I'm going to put together a little Google Drive for tomorrow morning, and then hopefully you'll be able to connect to it, and it should be fine. Okay? And you can drop in your application. Tesh, you good? Sorry, come on for a second.
Yes. Oh, sure.
All right, guys. Thank you so much, Dan. That's it for me. I'll stop recording this session, and I'll take any questions offline.